Welcome to our bi-weekly webinar series. We're live on Zoom and live streaming to YouTube as well. So in just a minute, I'll introduce our guest, Bill Schoolman, all the way from Fort Lauderdale. Before we begin, I just want to remind our viewers live or in the recording later on that you can join us on Zoom for these events. To get the login information, go to our meetup group at meetup.com/CFL Freethought. Join us there and then look for more events to be announced soon in this series. And then of course we've got, we continue to have Free Thought Cafe events and secular women events online. So you'll stay connected with us there. In 2 weeks, we have a presentation by a friend of the CFFC, Dr. Daryl Ray. His presentation is going to be entitled Religious Trauma, Its Roots and Treatment. So if you don't know about Daryl Ray, be sure to Google him and look for that event to drop into our YouTube, Facebook, and Meetup this afternoon. We continue to have events and we miss every single one of you. We're looking forward to getting back together soon, and we hope that happens sooner rather than later, but we appreciate everybody doing their best to help quell the spread of coronavirus. So the Zoom links to this event again are in meetup.com/CFL Freethought. If you want to join us on Zoom next time, you can also find us on Facebook as well as at CFL Freethought as well. You may notice that we're using Zoom Meeting again instead of Zoom Webinar. So some features are a little bit different, but not much. The main difference is that you can have your camera on, and we invite you to use your camera if you like, but please remain on mute during the call. We'll try to help manage that with you, but that way our speaker can stay spotlighted in the video. Those of you in the Zoom meeting can find the chat option available at the bottom of your screen on your computer. If you're on a mobile device, you may need to tap the screen and that should appear as an option there. So chat is where we need you to ask questions today. So put those in there, and if you want to be sure we see them, you can direct them to me specifically, or you can put the word question in front of it. That'll make sure that the chat is easy to find your question in there so we don't miss it. And I'll put those questions together for our speaker to answer at the end of the talk. And with that, I'll introduce our guest. Bill Schoolman is a speaker for the National Right to Die organization, Final Exit Network. And it's not necessarily part of their documentation to say this, but the Hemlock Society is their former name. And I want to point that out because that was a name that I was more familiar with up until recently. So Final Exit Network is the name now. Bill has an undergraduate degree in management and a Juris Doctor degree in law. For most of his professional career, he ran several smaller companies in the association field. He lives in the Fort Lauderdale, as I said, on the ocean. So that's awesome. We think about you when that happens. Gained extensive public speaking experience, first in the business arena and then as a volunteer for the American Civil Liberties Union, an ally of ours, in his case, the Broward County ACLU. Over a 10-year period with the ACLU, he served as president of the Broward chapter and as state vice president as well. So Bill was the primary speaker for the ACLU in Broward County. We are excited to have you with us here today, Bill. So welcome to the Central Florida Free Thought community. How are things in Fort Lauderdale?
Hot.
Hot.
Rainy.
I believe it.
And we're afraid to go out because of the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's a good fear to have.
Other than that, things are wonderful.
Good. Well, welcome. Well, tell us a little bit about the organization and perhaps your role in it, and what we need to know as interested, particularly humanists who are very much focused on this topic. Some of us feel like we're aging faster than others, but all of us know someone who falls into the category of needing to understand the services and the information that FEN provides. So help us out with that. And whenever you need those slides on the screen, just let me know.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to talk to all of you. And I thank all of you who have joined this meeting, notwithstanding the daunting subject matter. And I just want to start with one recollection. I was having a phone conversation with David, and I said, it's very rare that anybody falls asleep when I talk. But there was one exception to this. I was invited to speak at a retirement community, and they had a speaker series where they would invite a speaker every 2 weeks or a month or whatever it was. And I was the speaker that day. And the audience was very elderly in this. I remember this very tall individual who looked quite ancient walked in with a cane or in any event with a walker or a cane, and he decides to sit down 8 feet in front of me, and I start my speech, and he raises his hand in 5 minutes and says, I want to go over something. Could you please wait, sir, until the speech is over, and I promise you I'll call you first. Puts his hand down. I start talking again. 4 minutes, he yells out, I don't want anyone taking my life. And I said to him, sir, if you don't want anyone taking your life, then you don't have to worry about it. We don't believe in people giving up their lives if they don't want to. And then he started to talk further, and then I had the support of the audience starting to yell at him, shut up, be quiet, stop your talking. At which point I start my speech again, and he immediately shuts his eyes, goes to sleep, and slept through the entirety of the meeting, including the questions and answers. So that was pretty much the one and only time I was heckled and slept on. But today I want to talk to you about the right to have a peaceful death with dignity and compassion when a person has a horrific disease or physical handicap with no chance of recovery. And when we talk about diseases, we're talking about the full variety of cancers, muscular dystrophy, muscular sclerosis. Certainly one of the worst diseases anyone could get is ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. It could even be not a disease, but somebody had a horrific accident and is now a quadriplegic. And so in America, we love to talk about the birth of babies. Everyone loves babies, and that's the beginning of life. But in America, what I've noticed is we don't like to talk about the end of life. We don't like to talk about death, almost as if we talk about it, it's going to happen the next day. And the problem with putting off thinking about end of life issues is that by the time you might want to be thinking about them, it may be too late. So I'm urging you here to listen to what you might have to do yourself to avoid a tragedy where you ran out of options before you ended up dying. I was in the pet industry before I took early retirement. And pets, dogs and cats are our lifetime babies. We love them. They give unconditional love, certainly at least to the dogs. And I remember when I brought a dog to my veterinarian and he said, this is the 4th time you've been here. The dog is suffering. He is in pain. I've done everything reasonable that I can do, and it's time to let him go. There's nothing more you can do, doctor? Not reasonably. I can do a lot of things to him, but it's not going to help him, and it's going to prolong his suffering. I don't want him to suffer anymore. Do what you have to. On my ride home, I lost my little baby. I cried on the way home. But what this indicates, and most other people are the same, they don't want their pets to suffer. We give more support and understanding and compassion to the pain our pet is going through. And it sometimes seems crazy that we're more concerned about the suffering of the dog than often we are with human beings, where they have no chance to end their pain and suffering regarding the disease that they may have. So to me, it's sort of an anomaly. Now, 80%, and by the way, rather than just going into what FEN does, I wanted to give a little history of the Right to Die movement, because I think it's important for people to have a general idea. And 80% of people state that they want to die at home. And the net effect of that, and that was the case 50 years ago. Today, 70 to 80% die in a hospital, often tethered to wires and tubes. How in 50 years did this equation reverse itself? Going from 80% of people dying at home to 70 to 80% people dying in the hospital. And part of this is modern medical equipment and drugs that can often keep people alive past what is or was a reasonable, often time tethered to machines or feeding tubes. And what's happened here is, I'm sure most of the people listening in on this talk have heard of estimates of what Alzheimer's and dementia cases should be increasing to in the future, because we're living into our 90s, even the hundreds, and doctors refer to this as age-related dementia and Alzheimer's. What's going to happen with all these people? What's going to be the cost, both human cost and financial cost, of having huge increases in the Alzheimer's and dementia cases? This is something society hasn't dealt with, I don't believe, hardly at all. 35,000 people die of gunshot wounds, and about 13 of those 32,000, 13,000 die by self-inflicted wounds. People who shoot themselves are invariably men. 95% of the people who shoot themselves are men. What is the sadness? What is the pathos that somebody who will shoot themselves is going through? The despair, the hopelessness. A major portion of those 13,000 who shoot themselves feel they have no hope for the future, and their despair is so overwhelming that they will take this action and leave the mess for their beloved family members and beloved friends to have to clean up. Why were these people allowed to end up having so much despair and hopelessness? There is some good news, because I don't want to make this too dark. But today, some of the good news is that 70% of the American population supports some aspects of the right to die. Some aspects of the right to die with dignity, compassion, and peace. And for the first time, 50% of doctors say they support some aspects of the right to die. Now, there is good news here. Many of the people on this conference call may not know it, but 10 states have passed right to die laws. And what do I mean by right to die laws? The first state to pass a right to die law was Oregon about 22 years ago. And every other state has basically copied the state law that Oregon passed with minor variations. And the Oregon law basically provides that two doctors must attest to the fact that you, the sick and diseased patient, have less than 6 months to live, that your condition is not subject to recovery or improvement or going away prior to that 6 months, that you are of sound mind, and that you have verbalized to other people that you cannot bear your life and you want to end it. In that instance, in Oregon and these other states that I'll read a list of, what would happen when they approve this? One of the doctors will give a prescription for pills that will end the suffering and be painless in taking. So that the doctor, because we do not allow euthanasia in any way, shape, and form, will give the prescription, but cannot in any way help pass that. If, for example, the sick patient cannot move, the doctor is not allowed to come to the house or wherever the sick person is, and say, for example, bring the bottle of, get the pills himself or herself, bring it, put them in the sick person's mouth and give some water. That would be considered euthanasia. And if the sick person can't do that themselves, they'll get a family member or a friend to help them. The problem with this very limited but very good law, meaning I'm very, very happy that states are passing a right to die law. The problem is, what about all of the people who have a disease that is not subject of cure or going away, but the projected timeline that they will continue living is a year or 2 years or 4 years? So many cancers take years. Lou Gehrig's disease, from the time the person is diagnosed with this horrific illness to the time they end up dying, averages 2.5 years. And the last half of those years are spent in ever declining, awful condition. So these laws are terrific. We support states passing these laws, but they exclude so many suffering people. And that is sort of where Final Exit Network comes in. But I just want to talk a little history about somebody. I'm sure we remember the name Dr. Kevorkian. Kevorkian was a licensed doctor, and he believed that making people suffer when there was no need was sinful. And he was a very black and white, rigid individual. And notwithstanding any criticism that he got, he went forward. And I am sure that you can recall, he would video each of the deaths that he dealt with and hope that they would be run on television. He wanted to bring people's attention to the right to die movement, and he was pretty much one of the first. Now, he had a martyr complex, and the first 3 cases that he was charged with manslaughter, he hired a very good attorney, and the attorney ended up getting him off 3 straight times with hung juries. Some 1 or 2 or 3 on the jury said he's not guilty of murder. He's a saint. In any event, he didn't want to get off. So what did he do after the 3rd acquittal? He fired his attorney and represented himself. And people who represent themselves have a fool for client. And of course, in the first case that Kevorkian defended himself, he was found guilty, he was convicted, he was sentenced to jail. After about 5 years, they were willing to parole him. The authorities were so frightened about what he would do once he's out. The only way he was given parole was to promise not to help anyone take final self-deliverance, and he was not allowed to speak about the subject at all. Can you just imagine? They were so frightened of what he would say, that had to be a condition for his release. So that was Dr. Kevorkian. He died some years ago, but if there is this heaven, which I don't believe there is, he's looking down and he's saying, well, some good things have happened. As David said to you, I was an American Civil Liberties Union activist. And I was president of the Broward chapter of the ACLU and the state vice president. And as a civil libertarian, I question the fact that individuals cannot control their own body. They cannot control their own life, and we cannot control our own body under most of the laws in this country. And when the government says we cannot control our own life and our own body, I say that should not stand. That is unacceptable. It's primitive. It's vicious. And even though not legally binding, I believe that when the government says we have to suffer, that's cruel and inhuman punishment under the US Constitution. Cruel and inhuman punishment. I want to talk a little about medical power of attorney and living wills. We have to be careful that living wills are not followed by hospitals. Catholic hospitals do not find themselves bound by living wills if there are provisions that will bring on death sooner than just by natural causes. Other right to life people also vastly object to the right to die. Well, I have a personal situation that after a number of years brought me to Final Exit Network to be talking about a subject like this. I was the medical power of attorney for my partner of 33 years. He ended up having kidney failure, and after 4 years of waiting and continual declines in his health during that period, he finally was called down to get a kidney transplant. He got the kidney transplant. It worked perfectly well, but he didn't. And the other person who got the second kidney from the deceased was in his hospital room that first day and then left the next day. 8 years older than my partner and a previous cancer survivor. By about the fourth or the third day, it took my partner 30 days to die. Around the third or fourth day, I started to notice a distinct decline in his health. 2 weeks after he got in, it was very clear the direction he was going. And this was in Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. It was probably the largest hospital in the state of Florida. It was a municipal hospital, not a religious hospital. And after about 2 weeks, the medical specialist would come in, as they always did, with 2 or 3 residents. It was a teaching hospital. And I said, could I speak to you out in the hallway? So we go out in the hallway and I said, I just want to let you know I have medical power of attorney here. And my life partner has a living will, and 2 of the provisions of the living will state that I do not want to be kept alive by wires and tubes, and I want to be allowed to die naturally. And it turns out I went through the same routine with another set of doctors coming in another 10 days later. And I went through the same pitch with them. They didn't say anything. The first group, I left out something important. As soon as I finished talking, one of the residents said, "You don't mean that. You don't mean that." I'll never forget. And I said, I mean that, but most importantly, the sick patient means that. And he was a medical professional. He was a director of nursing in one of the largest medical complexes in America. And he knows what he wants. He supervised 125 nurses. He knows exactly what he wants. And then they left. And then I had the second instance with another set of doctors. They didn't say anything. So about 2.5 days later, I get called at 1:30 in the morning. You got to get to the hospital right away. Your partner is on his last legs. I rushed down. At that time, it was about 30 miles from the house. And I go to the critical care ward, and there's a doctor waiting for me. And he says, when I told him what I was there for, he says to me, "Now I want you to know his heart stopped, and we resuscitated him. And that was the other provision. Do not want to be resuscitated. His heart stopped, and we got it going again. And oh, by the way, there's a lot of wires and tubes and blood because we've done everything we could to keep him alive. I go in, I say my goodbyes, I'm crying. They send me out to wait in this dark, dingy, cold waiting room, and it's about 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning. And an hour and a half later, 2 people come in to announce that he's gone. Even though I'm an attorney, I was so emotionally distraught by all of this. I didn't think for about 6 weeks how they had violated my partner's living will. This was not a Catholic hospital. It was not a right to life hospital. It was a municipal hospital. To say that I was furious about this once I started thinking about it is to understate the situation. Well, what can be done? Something can be done, and Final Exit Network provides some options to terribly ill people when life is unendurable and suffering is unimaginable. So I joined FEN a few years after this awful incident, and I joined them to get the word out. And here's what FEN can start to do. If somebody calls Final Exit Network up, and let's say it's the sick patient, I don't want to live anymore, I'm in pain, I'm on such painkillers, my mind is halfway between here and Mars, I'm being tortured with my illness, with the pain that I go through, I just do not want to live anymore. When somebody calls us up with something like, and says something like that, the next step is for the person who spoke to them on the phone in the first instance to make a decision. Was there reason to pursue this further? And what then happens after that, they forward the name. Final Exit Network has a group of doctors, volunteers, who serve as a committee, 3 of them. They ask for the entire medical file to be received to make sure that what the justification is from a health standpoint, that the individual does not want to live any longer. And once they make a determination that Final Exit can go through our routine, they let the coordinator, the compassionate case coordinator know, and that person volunteers, the doctors are volunteers, the compassionate volunteers, everybody involved in this is pretty much a volunteer. And the compassionate volunteer will call the sick patient, or if the patient can't talk, will speak to a loved one, a spouse, a sibling, a dear friend, and find out what the update is on the patient's situation. And we'll set a date to come back and provide information as to what should happen. Final Exit Network, just like doctors which can't physically help somebody die, that's euthanasia, we as an organization, a private not-for-profit organization, cannot physically do anything with the individual, or that would, upon review by the police and the courts, find us in violation of the prohibition against assisted suicide. So a compassionate volunteer will meet with the patient and family and provide the information on how to have a peaceful and compassionate end. In general, pills are not available, or the appropriate pills are not available, number one. Number two, if they were available, previously, when there was not much demand for these kind of pills, they were $300 each. Today, it's $4,000 because there's a market for them. Congratulations, capitalism. Anyway, if the patient is alone, sometimes a FEN volunteer will fly in to sit with the patient at the end. To me, that's great compassion. I could not do what they're doing. I'm okay as a public speaker, but these people are so brave in my mind. They are so good to do what they do. Final Exit is a national not-for-profit organization with 4,000 members. Our job is to raise awareness and support for peaceful self-delivery and to be available, as said, for the most seriously ill who decide that life is no longer at all worth living. One of the things to make crystal clear is that we never, ever try to talk a sick patient into taking peaceful self-delivery. That is so verboten. We have to be asked and be sure that the sick person is very sincere and is not just going through a temporary depression or a temporary anxiety attack, lost his job, lost all of his money in the stock market, his wife died, so on and so forth. And anyway, if a loved one or a close family or friend died after a prolonged illness, and they had a horrific end, I say, this is terrible. I've known two people who died in a hospital, and one of them received chemotherapy until one day before they died. What's wrong with that? That hospital, those doctors must have known that chemotherapy at this juncture was not going to help, and they had to do it up until one day before they died. We can all think of some motives of the hospital. Certainly one of them might be financial. But anyway, that is something that FEN would hope we could avoid with people in the future. Ordinarily, I would say I'm reaching the end, and there's a table in the back with our literature on it. This, by the way, is my first computer speech. So just appreciate that this old dog is learning how to use modern technology. I'm pulled kicking and screaming into the 21st century from a technological standpoint. But this is the way society is going, and I might get to like this. It saves me from driving a long distance. I want to say before we put some things on screens, but if any of you know of any other organization that might like to hear this speech, whether a condo association, a retirement community, a religious organization, a public speaking group that has speakers come in, my mouth will travel, and send me the contact information, the person's name, the organization, and the phone number, and I'll follow up and call them. Okay, we will go into questions and answers, which I often think is the most important, not the speech, but the Q&As. But there are screens, David.
Yeah, should be up now.
Okay. You can get as attachments 2 of our quarterly newsletters, and you can pull them off of the computer. And this is the screen for that.
Yeah, this bill is the Google Drive we set up with those PDF documents that you were so nice to send, and this is our table in the back, folks. So if you'll go there, you'll land on our Google Drive, and everybody can access those files. Thanks.
Okay. Another file. There's our fan office phone, and I'll tell you what that's about. We hope that some of you consider joining us as members. We're a not-for-profit organization, as I said, with 3,500, 4,000 members. We're national in scope. Most of our work is done by unpaid volunteers. The only money we have coming in is our membership dues, which are very reasonable, $50 for one person, $100 for a couple. So it's not very much, and we need that for our support and to expand our efforts. And but this is a fan office phone. You have my email address because we have a new program. If you're not ready to join us as a member, we have a no-lose opportunity for you. So said the carnival barker at the circus freak show. In any event, this is my email address, billschoolman@aol.com. We're trying a new program for people, many of you I hope will sign up for, who are interested but not yet. They're interested in learning more about the right to die, learning more about final exit. We have a program where all you have to do is give us or give me your email address and name. We're not even asking for a phone number, and you will receive electronically over the next 12 months the 4 quarterly newsletters that come out. You will see the quality of these glossy newsletters. They're full of information about the Right to Die movement. They're full of information about Final Exit Network. And at the end of the year, we'll send an email and ask if you're interested in joining as a member. And if not, we'll just stop sending electronically the newsletters. As a member, one incredibly important document is a living will like nothing anyone has ever seen. It covers about 15 different things, and there's room to rate how important that is to you from 0 to 10. The purpose of this is to avoid confusion in a hospital where things are very clear. Now, I'm not going into much more detail about what happens if somebody has Alzheimer's or dementia. That's a very difficult issue, and the medical profession and the courts are concerned that if a patient put that provision in there that I do not want to be kept alive if I'm suffering from Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And they're worried about, has that person, since they wrote this down and since they've been hit with dementia and Alzheimer's, will they still agree with the original request that they've put in their living will? This is still an area that requires much more work by the courts, by the people, by the police, and so forth. In any event, there's one more screen, as I recall, David.
This is the last one, which has all the prior information on it.
Oh, okay.
And we'll put this back up again if we remember at the very end of the Q&A as well. So.
Okay. All right. Well, that's about it. I hope you found my speech interesting. I know it's a very difficult subject matter, and I thank all of you for having the bravery to listen to it. And I try as I can to make a few smiles, but this is a very difficult subject. And I have to say, in comparing this to my ACLU speeches, which sometimes deal with human rights, constitutional rights, civil liberties of the most serious nature, none of the speeches I gave for the ACLU, I think, have the emotion and import that this does. It's very difficult, and people ask me, why do you want to talk about such a difficult subject? It's depressing, it's this, it's that. And when I'm asked that question in front of a live audience, I say to them, if even one of you suffers less than you might have without having heard this discussion, if even only one of you suffers less, then I feel I've accomplished something. And it makes me feel better as a human being. Because I feel bad for all people and families and loved ones who have to go through all of this and watch their parent, their grandparent, their sister, their brother or spouse, or a child even worse. These things bother me so. And there's just one other thing that I want to mention, and that is that Final Exit Network works on the edge. There's one other group called Choices and Compassion, or Compassionate Choices. Their sole role is to lobby for right to die laws with all of the limitations that they have. And we deal with the people that aren't going to be, they're not going to fall under that law, or they're in a state that doesn't have a law. And by the way, 10 states have the law, but another 20 states are talking about it. Always hard to say what's going to happen, but I'm sure by November election day, several more states will be brought into the picture. And I forgot to give you the list. I'm doing it from memory. Oregon is the first state. Washington, the state of Washington, California, the biggest and most important state in the country, Colorado, Montana, Hawaii, Maine, Vermont, District of Columbia. I think I'm missing a couple, but those are the states that have that. And so about legal issues, Final Exit Network has been sued by 4 different states, and 3 states found us not guilty of violating the assisted suicide law. Because remember, we're giving information, we're not doing anything physical. Minnesota, that's all in the talk about a battleground state in the fall. Minnesota had a very right-wing district attorney, and he brought suit that we violated the assisted suicide law. And the facts of this case were simple. The sick patient was told, and his family was told, to buy a book called Final Exit by the guy who founded the earlier organization 2 Hours. And he wrote this book. It's been in print for over 30 years. It's had about 10 printings and updates. And all we did was say, buy that book and you'll see what you have to do. We lost in the lower court on the basis that just by giving that information, we violated the prohibition on assisted suicide. All we did was say, buy this book. We didn't do anything further. And we appealed to the appellate division and lost. We appealed to the state Supreme Court and we lost, and they fined the the organization, not individuals, $35,000. And then we sent a brief to the US Supreme Court asking for certiorari, and they deigned not to hear the case. They did not give us a no, but they just did not agree to hear the case. We argued on that case that we were simply denied our protection of freedom of speech under the US Constitution. Our general counsel considers the Minnesota finding against us to be a one-off and very bad. If what we said remained violating the assisted suicide laws, then where is the protection of freedom of speech under the First Amendment? We felt we had protected speech. That was not the case. That's an example of how difficult this area can be. So I think now with that, I'll take any questions you have.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. That was fantastic, and I appreciate, as I mentioned on our call a couple weeks ago, the seriousness of this makes it probably a harder presentation to deliver than many, but certainly your days in the law have brought you many serious presentations, I'm sure. And the subject of civil rights is something that I think many of us on this call are familiar with when it comes to our civil liberties, and the work we've done with ACLU, et cetera, has, brings us to that kind of mindset that you're in. But I have to agree that the passion that one brings to this is probably proportionate, as it is in many civil liberties cases, to whether or not they've had family members or friends who have been denied their rights. Right. This is certainly the case in the work you've done for much of your career in law, as well as with ACLU. So certainly parallels there. I do want to touch on a couple of things, and then you've answered a couple of questions in the last couple of minutes, which we've stricken from the list. But I do want to get to the status of the laws in Florida, but not after I mention one thing. You said some things about the healthcare system that I want to make sure that I clarify for you and with you. I don't think you said one thing that tells us that the healthcare system is overall bad or that everyone in the system is flawed. I think you pointed out some certain failures of the system when it came to your particular case, and it probably has to do not so much with the passion for helping people that most people are in the medical field for, but the zealotry to preserve life no matter what the cause, right? No matter what
That's
the cost,
correct.
rather, as well as perhaps, and I know this is kind of conjecture, but it's certainly worth considering, and one of our questions get to it, is the profit motive for continuing treatment and treatment and treatment. So I want to give you a chance to kind of reiterate that you're not beating up on the healthcare system as a whole. You're just saying these are some issues that we should have with this, particularly around end-of-life decisions.
Oh, I absolutely don't believe that the healthcare system is all bad or nearly all bad or just riven with awful things. All I've limited my comments on the healthcare system is, I believe, because of a broader state of morality amongst probably tens of millions of people in America, right to life people. That there's a blind spot for people who are suffering terribly, but will not be dying within 6 months. And by the way, there's another 6-month period, and that's my understanding is hospice. They basically require a likelihood or a prognosis that the sick patient entering hospice will last for about 6 months. So I think hospice is wonderful. I think the right to die laws are wonderful so long as the patient is covered by them. But I just think it's a blind spot that we have on the basis that some people think it's grossly immoral and murder to take away somebody's life, even when they want their life to end. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I said with the right to die laws, one criteria besides likely to die without cure in 6 months, but the person is in sound mind. If that adult is in sound mind and knows what he or she wants and it's reasonable under the circumstances because of the level of suffering that they're going through, then that's really bad. So it's limited to a certain segment of the population who deserve our attention.
Yeah. So one question that that I can dispense with really quickly here, and I just checked. It's Derek Humphrey who wrote Final Exit. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's get to some questions here. And let's start with how Florida stacks up, right? You're familiar with Florida from your experience, from your life, from your working with the law. Talk about Florida from this perspective in our rights here.
Well, I would suspect that Florida will end up getting a right to die law passed before hell freezes over. But don't be holding your breath that it's going to happen soon. We'll probably do it around the time Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia pass their right to die law. And it's very frustrating to me living in South Florida, which is basically the most progressive area in the state of Florida. When I worked for the ACLU and we had to talk about possibly suing in the state of Florida, I learned that it's another country entirely when you get about 30 miles north of Palm Beach. Mm-hmm. And the center of the state is also like that. So I don't expect Florida in the near future to pass a right to die law. But every state that passes a new right to die law is another piece of success moving us to a different dimension. But a different dimension where the majority of states will have that basic right to die law, which applies only to people who are going to die within 6 months, is going to be a long time in coming, let alone getting the state to have a law that says some of the stuff that Final Exit is recommending can be done. Yeah. So it's not soon.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for that. And I do want to note that there is a Facebook group for people that are interested in this subject, whether for themselves or others. It's a group I joined a while back, and I see posts from it fairly regularly. This is not an activism that I focus on, but it's certainly an interest of mine. So there's a group that's called Final Exit Network with 3.1 thousand members. A lot of good questions and answers in there. So please take a look at that if you're on Facebook. So Bill, the first of the many questions that we have, and certainly if you've got other questions, folks, please drop them into the chat. We'll try to get to them. We'll prioritize those that seem to be more broad and beneficial to the group, but you've got a lot of good ones here. So I think an obvious concern for the detractors from this right might be one that that describes some of the quote unquote victims of this advocacy being people who are not at the end of their lives, but still want to end their life, and might be a person that has mental health issues that is drawn to suicide, right? So I don't think there's a whole lot of confusion on this crowd, but what do you say to people who say, and you've addressed the idea that Final Exit is not just looking to end people's lives, it's looking to help people go through the process of understanding how this should happen, how it can happen, and when it's appropriate. So can you talk about that? How would you answer the question of someone who should not be subscribing to this end of life decision, and who should, regarding particularly suicide and mental health?
Well, if you're talking about depression as one possibility, the issue is this a temporary depression because of a life experience, like I said, losing your job, losing your money, losing a wife in divorce, a sick child of yours passes away? That we might say is a transitory depression. The more difficult issue is a lifetime of depression. I personally think that should qualify when a person, it might be called incorrect to say is of sound mind. I would say there that does the person know what he or she really wants and has good reasons to end them. I told you about the discussion of the difficulty of dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. We will have to address Alzheimer's and dementia from both an economic standpoint and how we're going to effectively deal with them. And if they have a living will, can we accept a living will that was made 8 years ago that says, in the event that I lose my mental faculties without Alzheimer's or dementia diseases, I do not want to continue living. This is still an open question. And there is just so much we can do in this. We, by the way, are absolutely the only organization in the United States that does the kind of thing that I talked to you about. And that's another reason why I think they're so important. I certainly hope that I'm alive to see the day come where we don't need final exit networking. We're a more a saner approach to, and a more beneficent approach to this will be the case. But that's going to be very, very long, maybe decades. And by the way, there are other countries that are much more advanced than we are. Switzerland, Belgium, Holland, I think Spain is talking about it, Canada. So it's not just the US that's talking about the right to die. So are pretty much most countries in the world, at least most advanced, technologically advanced and wealth advanced countries.
Interestingly, you pointed out that the progressive states and the progressive countries are in the same boat on this issue. So
yes,
Marilyn asked a question, which I'm going to summarize slightly differently to get to a little more information. So she asked about preparing healthcare surrogate forms. Are there some precautions we should take, and can FEN help with this? And are there attorneys who practice in this particular type of law? Should we focus on finding a good attorney? Should we seek help from the nonprofit FEN, or tell us about that process? Because I think she had some challenges when she had done this in the past.
You can do both. You can contact FEN and you can hire a medical specialist. There's gerontologists. I remember visiting an attorney who advised people about estates for, in our case, my father and mother, and their estate was so minuscule you could have put it in a Cracker Jack box. But sadly, because I was meant to be the son of immensely wealthy parents, and it was not to be. So there's two ways to go. FEN is the only one that somebody could contact, and you have the phone number just to even ask them questions. They will entertain those questions and try to give you the best answer. And then finding a lawyer who deals in this area. And there are lawyers, particularly in Florida, where we have such an elderly population and so many retirees. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that finding a reputable lawyer was particularly her concern, and I think that's good advice, is perhaps to get some references and shop around. And while not everybody can afford a lawyer or the time it takes to do that, it's something you want to plan ahead, as with all these end-of-life decisions. So, should we research the hospitals in our area so we know how we, our family members, will be treated and if our choices will be honored? Is that something we can do in advance? I mean, should we avoid a particular religious hospital or focus?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. This is easy to do. You can find, there'll be Catholic hospitals in your area. You do not want to bring a seriously ill family member that may die to that hospital, because they will drag this on for so long, and they will not follow the provisions that were not followed regarding my late partner. They won't follow those provisions. And you'll probably have more provisions if you become a member and get our living will. So that's not a hospital to go to. Find out other religious hospitals, a fundamentalist Christian run hospital.
So we have
Or,
Advent Health across Florida and much of the country, I think. So Advent Health so this Seventh-day Adventists are a fundamentalist Christian organization in some ways, but not in others. So is that one that you've heard about that has been challenging?
no,
Okay.
I honestly don't know.
Okay, so it's not that they're off the hook, it's just you haven't evaluated their care. Okay, got it.
That's correct.
Okay.
I did have a debate in front of Seventh-day Adventists when I was with the ACLU. And all I'll say there is they believe absolutely in separation of church and state because they're not a mainline organization. And if mainline religious organization get benefits, that won't come to them. They were worried about the move towards humanism in the country because they were fundamentalists in many ways.
That's right. So, so Choice asks a kind of tongue-in-cheek question. And by the way, we are going to go over. I think Bill, you've agreed we can go a little bit over. We're at an hour now, and that's fine. Choice has asked if one can purchase a firearm to use to end one's life, why is it difficult to get medication to do the same thing? And I think this is more of a musing than a question to you, but that certainly seems like a talking point worth having.
Well, I've never thought of that. I should write that down when the speech is over. But I think authorities would say, you may be getting that gun to protect yourself. You may live in a difficult area. You may have been robbed. You may have been raped. So you will argue that you're getting the gun to protect yourself, even if you know that you're going to use it to end your life. And
well, the argument would be the same for medication, right? You may be using it to relieve yourself from pain. You may be using it to treat an illness. And I think that this is what you're getting at is the reasons that we have to have a prescription for medication don't apply to these so-called Second Amendment claims, right? So if we treated guns like we treated medicine, we'd be having a very different conversation.
It's a night and day issue.
Yeah.
I put my phone in my drawer, and can you hear it?
It's okay. So we'll ask you the next question here. So, and this one is another, I think, a helpful musing by Jim Peterson. He ponders whether universal Medicare and or the reduction of the profit motive as a factor in medical decision-making might benefit the cause we're discussing. You alluded to that, I think, as well.
Well, it couldn't hurt.
Yeah.
How much it would help is really another question. When you think about it, the healthcare industry is the single largest industry in the country. And they're incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
The insurance, the health insurance companies, the doctors, the nurses, the hospital owners, the professional associations or the trade associations that represent these and have staffs of full-time, exceedingly well-paid lobbyists.
Yeah.
So this is part of the difficulty, and this is why I say, even though 20 states are looking at this, the only way that those states are going to move is if there's such a popular movement under the population that they have in their state, that it's going to be a political problem for them by not supporting this. Hard to say when a majority of states will have this law. But I'm looking for more states to have this right to die law, and I'm looking for more states that are willing to expand the definition of what should be helpful to the person with a terrible disease who is never going to get rid of that disease and is suffering terribly.
Have people, I don't think it's appropriate comparison here, but I'll analogize medical tourism, right? Whether you go to Mexico to get your teeth fixed or whether you go somewhere else to get some work done because of the cost of healthcare. I mean, what's been the case, and I do remember hearing about this in the past with Dr. Kevorkian, is what's the situation right now for people who wish to take advantage of death with dignity laws in other states? Is that a thing
Yes.
for people who can afford it, obviously, right, to travel?
And most states will require documents to be sent or prepared to indicate that they are, quotes, a resident of the state.
Okay, so residency establishment, and those are going to vary by state, I presume.
Will vary by state.
Okay.
Switzerland does not require you to be a citizen of Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And so they do have people coming from America to end their life and end their suffering.
Yeah. So somebody had posed the kind of the question, given the size of the retired population in Florida, it would seem logical that it would have more support here. I mean, what is it going to take to motivate all of us blue-haired people to get this done? I mean, is it really just limited by the conservative nature of our legislature? I mean, is the lobbying here not effective or ineffective or not done?
Well, the lobbying isn't done very much because we're the only ones pushing for a truly benign, positive law that will help long-suffering people. There's no other organization, as I said, that do what we do. The closest one is that Choices and Compassion, and they're just lobbying for this very limited law, which we think is wonderful. Mm-hmm. We support them completely. But they, interestingly enough, have made no effort once the state they lobbied in got a right to die law to extend any of the provisions. And they they think we're giving the right to die movement a bad name. I think that, if you pardon my language, is bullshit.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's not a working relationship between the two organizations then.
Not really. Even though we do have mixed memberships, mm-hmm. We do have members who are not just in Final Exit Network, but they contribute to this or to Choices and Compassion.
Right. So, what suggestions do you have for people who live in places where there are no death with dignity laws? I mean, obviously there are things that we can do. We just don't have the full array of legal protections at our hand.
Well, the things that can be done that come to mind is, of course, buying a handgun and blowing your brains out, which I consider to be disgusting. Another way to do this, which just leaving the words from my mouth just upset me. They can starve themselves to death. Anyone can do that. But just think about the injustice and the grotesqueness of saying to somebody, I'm sorry, Joe, Mary Jane, but you're not covered by anything. If you don't want to continue living, you have to starve yourself.
Right.
Think of the pathos of that. It just so offends me.
Well, and I think that the real harm here comes from the religious perspective that many of us have when it comes to death and life. And I think that we really have to get a grip around the conversation around, not just talking about sex with our kids, but talking about death with our family. Right. If we can have those conversations and have it not be, a sin to think about or to contemplate or to even actually facilitate, then I think that we have a much safer society for the conversation, and certainly much more compassionate options as that you're advocating for when it's necessary to do that. And certainly whether you buy a gun or stop eating, neither of those include the kind of protections that FEN would put into place to determine whether this is appropriate and that you have the information and preparation and that you're legally protected. I mean, you can't do this right if you do it outside of the established processes that make it better.
That's absolutely true. And when you were talking, what was coming to my mind about people doing it themselves with, quotes, pills, sleeping pills, all kinds of other pills. The problem with that is more often than not, when they try to do it themselves, they end up getting screwed up that the pills will make them, put them in a terrible state of affairs, but won't kill them.
Right. They're worse off, right? And their
Yeah.
families worse off. And the healthcare system is burdened by it, and their insurance may or may not come to the rescue. It's definitely a mess for sure. And I thank you for helping to guide us towards the options that Finn has. Let me put back on the screen for just a minute or so for folks that either joined late or wanted to see that. While we close out, I just want to make sure that that information is there. Again, you can reach out to Bill if you want to get those newsletters. You can use that tiny URL to get 2 copies, even without reaching out to Bill, and then you can use the office phone number again to seek particular help from them. But they are a membership organization, and they need your support. And I know at least one person, I think 2 on this call, will be reaching out to you about speaking, Bill. So folks that are on the call, be sure to use that. That email there to reach out to Bill if you want Bill to talk to your group. So if you want to finish up with anything, Bill, I'll let you go ahead and close out. And one last plug that you want to leave people with, kind of a final thought.
Well, one thing I would like to say, I consider myself a life humanist, and probably a secular humanist at that. I have hope that reason and fairness and a godly view that people shouldn't be made to suffer. Government is not doing what they should be doing, in my opinion, when they say, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. You're going to live at least 2 more years. And screw how painful you are. We're not going to suggest anything different.
Yeah. And your prolonged agonizing life is better for our religious values than their peaceful self-deliverance. So thanks so much, Bill.
Absolutely. And they feel very, very strongly about this. Not just Catholics, but fundamentalist right-to-lifers. And I think it's so misbegotten and so wrong to think that. But that's why it's important for us to get the word out, to talk to people about this subject. My only purpose in speaking here was not just to get new final exit members, but to give you an overview. I wanted to do that so you have an idea of what's happening. I had to make short shrift of, describing the right to die with dignity, compassion, and peace is not terribly hard. The general comments, it's the specifics, the moral, the ethical, the legal provisions are get very, very complicated.
Yeah, I would think there'd be some interest, and certainly it crossed my mind when we were talking earlier about suicide. What number of suicides, and I know it's impossible to track this as well, but it would be nice to know how many suicides would have been in that category of people who Finn could have helped, right? And whether the suicide would have not been a suicide is not what I'm getting at, but the amount of people who are actually ending their own life, whether appropriately or prematurely. It would be nice to have that data, Bill. Do you know if that data is out there anywhere?
No, I don't. Yeah. And my guess is there isn't any, because it is so hard to tell it's just hard to tell what the motivation was regarding something.
Yeah. Well, you brought a lot of good perspective to us, and folks, thanks so much for joining. I'm going to close out with a couple of things, Bill, but I wanted to thank you and also make sure folks reach out to you to have you speak to their group, because we do have folks that are from other groups here. So again, thanks for joining us, Bill, and we will, I'm sure, see you in person next time you're up this way in the Orlando area.
All right. Well, it's great talking to you, Humanist, as a fellow traveler in this area. You're the best people.
Thanks so much. So everybody, thanks for joining us today. And I want to be sure you know about the next event that we have in the queue. We just confirmed it, by the way, on August 9th. We'll have Dr. Del Rey talk about some of the things that we have alluded to today. His talk is going to be religious trauma, its roots and treatment. So Del Rey is a friend of the Central Florida Free Thought community. He's visited Florida a few times and actually joined us on the Free Thought cruise way back in 2016, I think. So anyway, you can find us on Facebook, Meetup, and YouTube, and please keep in touch however you are able. We are everywhere at CFL Free Thought. That's Central Florida Free Thought, CFL Free Thought. So on the web, on Facebook, on Meetup, YouTube, all at CFL Free Thought. Until next time, keep up the good fight, stay safe, and take care.